Hello everyone, welcome to Lawgiver, a Planet of the Apes podcast. My name is Tom Elliot, and some of you might know me as the host of the long-running show, the Twilight Zone podcast. Now in the next year or two, the Twilight Zone podcast will be drawing to a close, which is giving me the chance to focus on another of my passions, Planet of the Apes, in all its forms. Now if you've listened to the Twilight Zone podcast, you'll know that it has a very specific solo format that I've kind of honed over the years, but Lawgiver is going to be quite different. I like to think of it as a multi-format podcast. Most of the time it will be a solo show, a kind of audio documentary or review, but from time to time I might bring in some of my podcasting friends to join me in a discussion about a certain piece of Apes media. Sometimes an episode might be an hour or more, but sometimes its focus might be very small, so it'll only be 5 or 10 minutes long. The sky is really the limit on how I'm going to present this. So what's going to be included? Well, I aim to really look at everything Planet of the Apes. Of course, there is, the movies, the original ones and the reboots, but there's also tie-in novels and novelizations, the television series and the animated series, but also the wealth of Planet of the Apes comics that have been published over the years too. So nothing is off the table. But what I won't be doing is tackling it all chronologically. Sometimes I might have clusters of podcast episodes looking at particular topics, like maybe a few of the television episodes, sort of mini seasons of things. And then sometimes it'll just be one-offs, but it will be all over the map. One episode might be about one of the original movies, but then the next could be about a new comic that's come out. So I will be jumping back and forth through the Planet of the Apes timeline. Now, when I started the Twilight Zone podcast, I was one of the first people in that podcasting space looking at that show. And the Twilight Zone podcast has been running for over a decade now. But with Planet of the Apes, I know that there are already people in this space doing great work. So obviously there will be some crossover with what they are looking at and what I'm looking at. But I think that's fine. One of the great things about podcasting is that there is room for different people bringing different takes on the same material, different points of view. But hopefully with my approach, I'll be doing it a little bit differently, and if you've already subscribed to one of those shows, this will be something that can coexist nicely with those. As Twilight Zone podcast listeners will know, I interviewed a lot of people connected to the Twilight Zone over the years, but with Lawgiver, I'm not going to be chasing down interviews as such, but sometimes if an opportunity is dropped on my desk that's too good to ignore, then maybe that's something that I will do. So we'll see what happens with that. So we're almost at the end of this initial introductory episode, but what you will notice is that this is a podcast that is supported by advertising. And I make no apologies for that, because podcasting is time consuming and also comes with a certain amount of expense. And I think it's only fair that there is some kind of reward for that time. And running ads is one way to do it. However, if you're not keen on hearing advertisements in your podcasts, there will be an ad-free version for a small fee in the near future, which I will announce in due course. And also, in these early stages of the podcast, Lawgiver episodes won't be that regular while I finish off the Twilight Zone podcast. So Lawgiver will be an occasional podcast more than a regular one, probably for the next year or so. And then after I've finished the Twilight Zone, Lawgiver will pick up more and more. Now, the first episode of Lawgiver that you'll find in the feed is actually an old episode of the Twilight Zone podcast that I did a few years ago now, looking at the involvement of Twilight Zone creator Rod Serling in bringing the original movie to the screen. And it's a long one, but hopefully you'll find it to be a rewarding one. And like I said earlier, not all episodes will be this format or this long, but some of them might be. So finally, what I will say is this. I have been a Planet of the Apes fan for my entire life, but I'm by no means an expert. There are probably several of you out there who are bigger apes experts than I am. But that's not how I'm approaching this. I'm more treating this as a journey through all of the universe of Planet of the Apes, where I discover things as I go. And I hope that you'll join me on this journey as I make these discoveries. So I will be speaking to you soon on Lawgiver, a Planet of the Apes podcast.
In the beginning, God created beast and man so that both might live in friendship. Evil men betrayed God's trust and waged bloody wars, not only against their own kind, but against the apes. Our Savior led a remnant of those who survived in search of greener pastures, where ape and human might forever live in friendship.